"45 pan-Democrats sentenced to jail for conspiracy to subvert state power." The city's two power companies plan to raise electricity tariffs next year. Vice Premier He Lifeng repeats support for Hong Kong in bolstering its global financial hub status. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. A Hong Kong court today handed down jail sentences against 45 pan-Democrats for conspiracy to subvert state power. Only 2 of the 47 defendants in the case were acquitted. The others received prison terms ranging from 4 years and 2 months to 10 years. Mimosa Ngai reports.
The convicted defendants arrived at West Kowloon Court in the morning. Hundreds of residents lined up outside the court building amid the cool weather, hoping to get an admission ticket to attend the hearing. The diplomatic community also paid close attention to the trial, with consulate generals and EU representatives arriving at the court. Former chairperson of the Democratic Party, Emily Lau, the current chairman of the party, Low Gin-hei, and Cardinal Joseph Zen, a retired Catholic bishop of Hong Kong, also turned up. A panel of 3 national security judges handed down the sentences. The first defendant, Benny Tai, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is the minimal penalty for principal offenders under the national security law. Identified as an initiator and organizer of the unofficial primary election in 2020, sentencing for Tai started at 15 years in prison. The court reduced that by 1/3 in view of his early guilty plea. Still, the 10-year sentence is the heaviest among all those handed down in the case. Au Lok Him, Andrew Jiu, and Zhong Gamlearn were also considered principal offenders. Au was given a jail term of 6 years and 9 months, while Jiu and Zhong were sentenced to 7 years and 6 years and 1 month respectively. Sentences for the trio were also reduced by 1/3. The court said the 5th defendant, Gordon Ng, was an active participant in the conspiracy and was sentenced to 7 years and 6 months behind bars. The judges said they had taken into account that Ng was not after any personal gain and the scheme did not involve any use of violence. They also said Ng might have been misled by Tai and thought the primary election was lawful.
After the hearing, some family members waved to the defendants before their loved ones were taken away. Meanwhile, a large number of police officers remained outside the court. Memos 9, TVB News.
The court categorized the remaining defendants as active participants. The starting point of the penalty for them was 7 years in prison. Mimosa Ngai again.
Apart from the 4 organizers of the primary election and Gordon Ng, the other Democrats were all participants of the scheme and were found to be active participants. While the starting point of the penalty for each defendant was set at 7 years in prison, the final penalty depended on their individual mitigation pleas and circumstances. Former Civic Party members Claudia Mo, Jeremy Tam, and Kok Ka Kay, who pleaded guilty in the trial, all received a sentence of 4 years and 2 months. Another ex-Civic Party member, Alvin Yearn, who also pleaded guilty, received a jail term of 5 years and 1 month. The court said he had taken a proactive and leading role in the party's involvement in the primary election. Former Democratic Party member Wong Bik Wan was given a prison term of 6 years and 6 months. She did not plead guilty. Lam Cheuk Ting, who also pleaded not guilty, was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months imprisonment. Ex-chairman of the party, Wu Ji-wai, received a more lenient sentence, 4 years and 5 months. Wu pleaded guilty. Former People Powers members Tam Tak-ji and Raymond Chan were sentenced to jail for 4 years and 5 months and 6 years and 6 months, respectively. Graneth Ho, who did not plead guilty or put forward any mitigation plea, received a jail sentence of 7 years. Ex-lawmaker Leung Kwok-hong received a prison sentence of 6 years and 9 months. Mons 9, TVB News.
Following the sentencing, Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded to the subversion case, saying no one can engage in illegal activities and try to escape punishment in the name of democracy. Secretary for Security Chris Tang said the government will consider whether to appeal the sentences of individual defendants. Many relatives and friends of the defendants were at the court today and spoke to the press. Speaking to the press following the sentencing, Secretary for Security Chris Tang said the judgment reflected the severity of the offences and the government will look into the individual cases before deciding whether to appeal.
Different people may have different judgment about whether sentencing is appropriate, but I think the important point is the rule of law.
On 8 people arrested but currently on bail.
If we have sufficient evidence, we will arrest and we will prosecute. And there is no time bar.
In Beijing, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the central government supports the SAR government's work to safeguard national security. A spokesperson Li Jian said no one should be allowed to use democracy as a pretext to engage in unlawful activities and elude justice. He said certain Western countries ignore the fact that they also have their own national security legislation, and Beijing firmly opposes interference in China's internal affairs and attempts to smear Hong Kong's rule of law. New People's Party lawmaker Regina Ip said the sentences are relatively lenient. She said taking into account common law principles with the guilty pleas and how the defendants have been detained for a considerable period of time, the sentences are reasonable. She said the judgment reflected the independence of Hong Kong's judiciary and she hopes the defendants will sincerely repent when they are released from prison. Philip Bowring, the husband of ex-lawmaker defendant Claudia Mo, said he's relieved that the sentences were finally handed down.
She's a strong woman, and so we will survive. But it's been a long time already, given the nature of the case.
Will you bring her go away from Hong Kong after her releasing?
I have no plans for that at all.
You'll stay in Hong Kong?
We have no plans to leave. So.
Australian Consul General also at the scene.
We have a particular interest in providing consular support to Australian citizen Gordon Ng, who is facing sentencing today, and we'll be reporting back to Canberra once that's happened. Thank you very much.
The landmark national security case, dubbed the Hong Kong 47 case, is the first case of conspiracy to subvert state power since the city's national security law came into force. It also involved the largest number of defendants with 47 Democrats and lasted more than 3 years, from arrest to sentencing. The case began with a plan outlined by Benny Tai, a former associate professor of the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong. In his roadmap, 10 Steps Towards Mutual Destruction, Tai proposed a strategy to shortlist the best candidates in an unofficial 35-plus primary elections. That aimed to secure a majority of the Legislative Council's 70 seats for the pro-democracy camp at the 2020 LegCo election. So they can veto the government's budget twice, which they claim could lead to the resignation of the chief executive, which could in turn paralyze the government, triggering a political stalemate with a general strike as well as violent suppression by authorities. Prompting Western sanctions on Beijing, that plan Tai envisioned could force the government to respond to the 5 demands from protesters. In September 2020, Tai said, "We will not be foolish enough to create an excuse for those in power to disqualify people who participate in the 35-plus project." During the coordination period, Benny Tai and some defendants failed to reach a consensus on whether to sign a statement to declare their stance. Eventually, 3 defendants, Owen Chow, Sam Chung, and Fergus Leung, drafted the declaration Resolute Resistance Ain't Without Regret, on which over 30 defendants signed. They include barrister turned ex-lawmaker Alvin Yeung of the Civic Party. All these culminated in a 2-day primary election held as scheduled more than a week after the passage of the national security law in 2020. More than 610,000 people cast their vote. Tai at the time said he didn't see how the polls constituted an illegal means according to Article 22 of the National Security Law, as such powers were conferred to the Legislative Council by the Basic Law. The Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office and the Liaison Office of the Central People's Government later issued a statement naming Benny Tai and groups including Power for Democracy also called the primary election illegal, saying it openly challenged the national security law. Soon defendant and ex-lawmaker Au Nak Hin, as well as former convener of the Power for Democracy Andrew Chew, announced their withdrawal from the cause. And Benny Tai said he would take a break. The Legislative Council election was delayed for a year due to the pandemic. The police's National Security Department arrested more than 50 people. Among them, 47 were charged with conspiracy to subvert state power. 31 of them, including Benny Tai, pleaded guilty, while 16 others pleaded not guilty. Barrister Lawrence Lau and Lee Yu-sun, a former Civic Party member, were acquitted of the charges. The remaining 14 were convicted. It has been more than 3 years since the arrests of some defendants. The Department of Justice has filed an appeal against Lau's acquittal. 8 defendants, including James To and Roy Kwong from the Democratic Party, were arrested in the same case. They have not been prosecuted so far. The city's 2 power companies will raise electricity tariffs next year, just by under 1%. Representatives of CLP Power and Hong Kong Electric went to the Legislative Council to explain the changes in the annual tariff review. Taking into account the basic tariff and fuel cost, CLP Power will raise electricity tariff by 0.98% to 144.3 cents per kilowatt hour. CLP says the ongoing global geopolitical risks are keeping fuel at high prices, with the outlook uncertain. Hong Kong Electric will raise tariff by 0.9% to 167 cents per kilowatt hour. Vice Premier He Lifeng said China will move ahead with capital market reforms and in the opening up of its financial sector for foreigners, while supporting Hong Kong in bolstering its credentials as a global financial hub. He also backed Hong Kong's further consolidation in its role as a global hub for offshore renminbi transactions. The pledge was made at the Global Financial Leaders Investment Summit held in the city. He hopes Hong Kong will seize the opportunities brought by China's reforms and development and continue to deepen financial reform and innovation. He added that Beijing will also support more high-quality enterprises from China to list and issue bonds in Hong Kong. Welcome back. At the G20 summit in Brazil, President Xi Jinping has presented China's plan of action to shore up global development and highlighted a joint technology initiative to support the global south. Danny Zhou reports.
President Xi was welcomed by his Brazilian counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva upon his arrival at Rio de Janeiro's Museum of Modern Art. In his address at the G20 summit, Xi told world leaders that multilateral efforts are needed to address shared challenges, pledging that China will always be a reliable partner of developing countries. He outlined 8 major actions to shore up global development, including high-quality collaboration under the Belt and Road Initiative and expanding unilateral opening up for the least developed nations. China, Brazil, South Africa, and the African Union will launch the Open Science International Cooperation Initiative, which will funnel tech innovations to the global south. Urging for a fair and equitable global governance system, the Chinese leader warned against protectionism in his call for building a world economy characterized by cooperation, openness, and eco-friendliness. Brazil, the host of the 2024 G20 summit, proposed to launch a global alliance to combat poverty and hunger. It has the backing of 80 countries, with China as a key participant. President Xi called it a crucial step towards global equity and sustainable development. He said China's achievement of lifting 800 million people out of poverty is proof that developing countries with determination and persistence can eliminate poverty. Meanwhile, as Ukraine marks 1,000 days since Russia's full-scale invasion, President Xi reiterated his appeal for de-escalation of the war. He called for avoiding spillovers from battlefields and reaching a political solution. While G20 leaders were posing for their traditional group photo against the backdrop of the iconic Sugarloaf Mountain, US President Joe Biden missed out on the shoot, along with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The White House blamed logistical issues, saying the photo was taken early before all the leaders were there. Danny Zhou, TVB News.
5 people were killed and 18 injured late Monday when an Israeli airstrike hit a densely populated residential area of Beirut near key government and diplomatic buildings. This as U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein landed in Beirut for talks with officials on a truce between armed group Hezbollah and Israel. Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a U.S. proposal for a ceasefire. Israel has some comments on the content, but a top Lebanese official has described the effort as the most serious yet to end the fighting. Tracy Furness reports.
For a second consecutive day, Israeli strikes have pounded central Beirut, targeting who they say are Iran-backed Hezbollah militants. This eyewitness said he heard an explosion inside the cafe. There is nothing of Hezbollah inside, so they can target it. There is nothing. There are no weapons, no Kalashnikovs, he said. The Israeli military said Hezbollah had launched more than 100 projectiles towards Israel on Monday. Here in Ramat Gan in central Israel, rescue services said 5 people were injured in a Hezbollah rocket attack. And here in Shefarim, northern Israel, 1 woman was killed and 10 other people were wounded in a similar attack. In Tel Aviv, a rocket interception was seen above the city on Monday. The Israeli military said its forces had intercepted projectiles crossing from Lebanon into Israel's territory. 4 people were wounded in a main street from falling shrapnel of an intercepted missile. Meanwhile, an Israeli government spokesperson said its military operation in Lebanon will continue as negotiations continue over U.S. proposal to secure a ceasefire with Hezbollah.
The United States and other countries are leading the negotiations to return quiet to the north. But we'll be very straight with you. The military campaign will continue until the immediate threat from Lebanon is removed. And our people, Israelis...
Tracy Furness, TVB News.
And that's the news. Thank you for watching.